Welcome, Mrs. Karma here. I want to tell you about the night I stopped being naive. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no screaming, no broken glass, no tearful confrontation in the rain. It was a Tuesday. I had made dinner, roasted chicken with the herb crust that Darian always said was his favorite, and he called at 6:15 to say he'd be home late. Again, a client dinner, he said. He said it the way people say things when they've practiced it so many times it has stopped feeling like a lie to them. Smooth, automatic, like a reflex. I said, "Of course, I'll save you a plate." And I meant it. Because that was who I was then. Soraya Veldt, 41 years old, 14 years married, genuinely in love with a man who had, somewhere along the way, quietly decided I was no longer the most important person in his life. I didn't know that yet. Not for certain, but I was beginning to feel it the way you feel, a change in weather before the clouds arrive, something in the air, something off. The first clue wasn't the receipt. The receipt would come later. The first clue was the way Darian started closing doors. We had always been a relatively open household. He worked in commercial property development, land acquisition, project financing, the kind of work that fills a kitchen table with blueprints and spreadsheets on a Sunday morning. I was used to his files, his folders, his dual monitors lit up with figures I understood well enough because after 14 years you absorb the shape of someone's work even if you don't practice it yourself. I managed the financial oversight for a mid-sized nonprofit. Numbers were not foreign to me, but around 9 months before that Tuesday, Darian began closing his study door, not locking it, just closing it, a small thing. An easy thing to explain away. He's on a call, he's concentrating, everyone needs privacy sometimes, except that the door had always been open before. I noted it, filed it somewhere quiet in the back of my mind, and went on living. Then came the phone. He started placing it face down on surfaces. He started taking it to the bathroom. He started flinching, just barely, just a half-second muscle response, when it buzzed while I was nearby. And then the receipts. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me and because it's true. I was looking for a pen in his study one afternoon when he was out. I pulled open the shallow drawer on the left side of his desk, the one we both use casually for office supplies, and beneath a yellow legal pad, I found a folded paper receipt from a restaurant in the Harbor District, a part of the city where neither of us had any reason to be. Dinner for two, a bottle of wine that cost more than we typically spent on a full week of groceries. The date, a Thursday 2 weeks prior, when Darian had told me he was in meetings all day and grabbed takeout on the way home. He had come home carrying bags from our usual Thai place. I remembered because I had been touched by it. I thought, he thought of me. I stood in the study holding that receipt for a long time. Then I folded it exactly as I had found it, placed it back beneath the legal pad, and went to start a cup of tea. I did not cry. I did not confront him. I did not call my friend Kyla in a panic. I sat with my tea and I thought very carefully about what I knew and what I didn't know yet, and I decided I was going to know everything before I did anything at all. My name before I married was Soraya Veldt. My mother was Nigerian, my father Dutch, and they raised me in a household where emotion was respected but never weaponized. My mother used to say, "The woman who reacts immediately hands her enemy the first advantage." I thought that was a little dramatic when I was a teenager. I think about it constantly now. I began paying attention in a way I hadn't before, not obsessively. I was careful not to let it consume me because I still had a job, still had a life, still had to show up to board meetings and smile at colleagues and call my mother on Sundays. But I watched. I listened. I cataloged. Over the following 6 weeks, I learned the following. Darian's phone received messages from a contact saved as L. Farrell, property, on a frequency that had nothing to do with standard business hours. 7 in the morning, 11 at night, twice on a Sunday. He had started keeping a second gym bag in his car. I found this by accident when I borrowed his car to take mine in for service. The bag contained toiletries I didn't recognize, a cologne I had never smelled on him, a brand of deodorant different from what we kept in our bathroom, and his calendar. The shared family calendar we had used for years to coordinate our schedules had developed blank spaces where previously he'd been consistent about logging appointments, whole afternoons, entire evenings. Just gone, not deleted, never added. He was living a parallel life in the gaps. The night I followed him, I didn't plan to. It was the first Friday of October. He had told me he had a dinner with a potential investor, someone he couldn't afford to keep waiting. He kissed me on the cheek when he left. He smelled like the unfamiliar cologne. I don't know exactly what made me get up from the couch, slide my feet into shoes, and pick up my keys. Some part of me had simply had enough of not knowing. I gave him a 7-minute head start. Then I followed. He drove 35 minutes out of our neighborhood into a quiet suburb on the eastern edge of the city. A developing area. I recognized the geography from the general sector of his work. New construction, tree-lined streets in the process of becoming something intentional. He pulled up to a house on a corner lot. 2 stories. Pale gray siding, a wide front porch, with a swing that hadn't been installed yet, just leaning against the railing. There was a car already parked outside, a silver hatchback I didn't recognize, and a man standing on the front steps with a folder tucked under his arm, professional, patient, clearly waiting. I parked half a block away. I watched. Darian got out of the car. He shook hands with the man on the steps. They went inside. The lights came on in the front room. I waited 20 minutes. Then a second car arrived, a dark green compact. A woman got out. She was younger than me, mid-30s, I would guess, well-dressed. She walked to the front door like she had walked to it before, comfortable in the geography of the place. She didn't knock. She used a key. Something in my chest went completely, terribly still. I noted the license plate of her car. I noted the address of the house. I took photographs with my phone, staying low and at a distance that kept me entirely unremarkable. Then I drove home. I reheated the remaining chicken from earlier in the week. I ate. I cleaned up. I went to bed. Darian came home at 11:40. I pretended to be asleep. He was careful. Shoes off at the door, lights kept low, considerate even now of habits we had built together. I lay in the dark and I thought, I know what this is. Now I need to know everything else. The following Monday, I called Kayla Soren. Kayla and I have been friends since graduate school. She is sharp in the way that people who have survived difficult things become sharp. Precise, unsentimental about the facts of a situation, and absolutely loyal to the people she loves. She is also, by profession, a forensic accountant, which is a detail that would become very useful. I met her for coffee on a Tuesday morning and I laid out everything I had observed over the previous 2 months. The receipts, the calendar gaps, the second gym bag, the house, the woman with the key. Kayla listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her cup and said, "How much access do you have to your joint accounts?" "Full access," I said. "We've always maintained full joint visibility." "And his business accounts?" "Those are separate. They always have been." She nodded slowly. "Give me a week." I didn't ask her exactly what she was going to do. I trusted her, and I had already decided that I wanted information, not comfort. Kayla understood the difference. While Kayla worked, I did my own research. The license plate I had photographed belonged to a vehicle registered to an Elysia Marin. A quick and careful search through professional networks, the kind of light-touch digital footprint research that anyone can do if they know where to look, told me that Elysia Marin worked in interior design. Freelance, with a client list that she kept deliberately vague on her public profiles. She was 36. She had attended a design college in another city before relocating here approximately 4 years ago. 4 years. Darian and I had attended a company gala 4 years ago. I remembered it because he had come home from it unusually energized, talking about new contacts, new possibilities. I had been glad for him. I sat with that for a moment. Then I moved on. The man on the steps with the folder. I had managed to capture a partial image in one of my photographs. Clear enough. A brief search of real estate agency websites in the eastern suburb area eventually surfaced him, Lucian Farrell. Licensed real estate agent, specializing in new development residential properties. Lucian Farrell. L. Farrell, property. The contact in Darian's phone. So the meetings labeled L. Farrell, property were not entirely a lie. They were just not the kind of property meetings Darian had allowed me to believe they were. Kayla called me 9 days after our coffee. "Soraya," she said, and her voice had that particular flatness it gets when she is working to stay neutral on your behalf. "I need you to be sitting down." I was sitting down. I told her so. Darian has a secondary business account that isn't tied to his main company structure. It's held under a numbered entity, a holding company registered 18 months ago. Over the past 14 months, he has been moving money into that account in amounts designed to stay just under standard reporting thresholds. The total, as of last month, is somewhere in the range of $340,000. I breathed carefully. From where? Some from consulting fees paid to the holding company, fees that appear to be for services rendered to a company that I believe is connected to Alicia Marin's interior design work. Some from what looks like deliberate underreporting of project revenues in his main business. Soraya, this isn't just infidelity, this is financial concealment. In the context of a marriage, depending on how it's structured, this could constitute fraudulent dissipation of marital assets. The house, I said, purchased last month through the holding company. Alicia Marin is listed as the intended occupant. The purchase price was $212,000, paid largely in cash from that account. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I opened them. Kayla, I said, I need you to help me understand something. If the property was purchased through a holding company that used marital assets, money that should legally be considered shared, what are my options? She was quiet for a moment. You need a very good attorney, she said. And you need to not touch anything, not move anything, and not let him know you know. Not yet. I understand, I said. Soraya, are you okay? I'm going to be, I said. I just need to think. I hired an attorney named Priya Shan, whom Kayla recommended and whom I met under the cover of a casual lunch near my office. Priya was the kind of lawyer who listened to everything twice before she spoke, and when she did speak, it was with the specific, unembellished clarity of someone who had seen every permutation of human marital disaster and found all of them solvable, given the right approach. She confirmed what Kayla had told me and then added a few things I hadn't known. Because Darian's holding company had been funded in part through what Priya called traceable marital income, the assets held within it, including the newly purchased property, were potentially subject to equitable distribution claims in a divorce proceeding. The financial concealment could also be characterized as fraud, which would significantly affect any eventual settlement. And the pattern of transfers, once documented and presented to the appropriate authorities, could constitute a reportable financial crime. So the house could become mine, I said. Priya looked at me with the measured expression of someone choosing her words precisely. With the right filing strategy, the right documentation, and the right timing, the house could become subject to a claim that would be very difficult for him to contest. I nodded. I thanked her. I went back to work. Now let me tell you about the recording. About 3 weeks after my conversation with Priya, Darian came home on a Saturday afternoon in a strange mood, restless, almost celebratory in a way he was trying to conceal. He poured himself a drink in the kitchen, which he rarely did before evening. He was humming something under his breath. I came in and asked him how his morning had been. He looked at me and said, "Actually good. Really good. Some things are coming together," I said, warmly, curiously. "With the new development project?" And he smiled, the first real, unguarded smile I had seen from him in months, and said, "Sort of. An investment. Something I've been putting together quietly. I didn't want to mention it until it was finalized." "An investment," I said. "In property?" Something flickered across his face, a brief recalculation. Then he tilted his head slightly and said, in a tone that I can only describe as condescending in a way that was probably meant to sound reassuring, "I've been making some moves, Soraya, for our future. You don't need to worry about the details. I've got it covered. Our future." He used those words about a house he was giving to another woman. I kept my face soft and curious and said, "That sounds exciting. I'm glad things are coming together." And then I excused myself to go fold laundry. My phone, which I had placed on the kitchen counter before his arrival with the voice memo application running, had captured every word of that exchange in clean, usable audio. I had been recording our kitchen conversations opportunistically for 2 weeks. Not constantly. I'm not speaking of surveillance. I mean that whenever a conversation felt like it was tilting toward relevance, I let the phone run. Priya had advised me on what was legally recordable in our jurisdiction, and in our state, single-party consent applies. I was the party. I consented. I had 4 recordings by the time it mattered. That one. Two others in which he made oblique references to getting things arranged and timing being right. And one, 3 days later, in which, during an argument about a completely different topic, our weekend plans, he said with a coldness that stunned me even knowing what I knew. "You'll be fine, Soraya. You always land on your feet." He said it like a goodbye he hadn't told me about yet. Kayla came through once more in mid-November. She had done some additional digging, careful, ethical, within the scope of what was accessible through professional public records and some careful social media forensics. And what she found about Alicia Moran was illuminating. Alicia had not simply become Darian's affair partner. She had been, Kayla believed, actively strategic about it. She had cultivated the relationship with an awareness of Darian's financial position and had been, over the course of their arrangement, using her interior design business as a vehicle for payments that moved money in ways that obscured their origin. Specifically, several of the consulting fees paid to Darian's holding company appeared to have been routed through Alicia's business accounts, creating the appearance of legitimate business income while actually constituting a form of financial laundering. Kayla was careful to frame this as her professional interpretation, not legal fact. But she flagged it, and I passed it along to Priya. Priya was quiet on the phone for a long moment. Then she said, "Has she done this before, with other men?" "I don't know," I said. "It might be worth finding out," Priya said. It was. A brief search, careful, again quiet, well within legal boundaries, surfaced a civil dispute from 4 years prior in another city involving a business arrangement between a woman named E. Marin and a property developer. The dispute had been settled privately. The records were sealed, but the fact of the dispute was public. I noted it. I passed it to Priya. "This establishes a pattern," Priya said simply. "If she does it again, if we can catch her doing it again, that becomes very important." So I gave her the opportunity to do it again. This is the part that people, when they eventually learned what I had done, found either brilliant or ruthless depending on their disposition. I prefer to think of it as efficient. In early December, I manufactured a rumor. I did this through a mutual acquaintance, someone who moved in overlapping social circles with both Darian's professional world and, it turned out, Alicia's. I mentioned, in a conversation that felt casual and confidential, that I had been exploring a significant career opportunity overseas, a nonprofit leadership role in Amsterdam. "I was considering it seriously," I said. "Darian and I had been discussing it. Things might be changing for us sooner than people expected. I knew this would travel." It was the kind of information that moves quickly through social networks that run on perceived status and real estate. And I knew, because Kayla had confirmed it through her research, that Alicia Marin monitored these networks carefully. The rumor reached her within 8 days. I know this because of what she did next. She accelerated. Through Lucian Farrell, Alicia began a parallel process of attempting to secure the Grey House in her own name, independently of Darian's holding company. She moved quickly and, in her haste, she moved sloppily. She made financial transfers to Lucian Farrell's brokerage account in a manner that was not properly structured. She used funds that Kayla, watching the associated accounts through public financial disclosure records and educated inference, believed were connected to the same obscured revenue streams she had been routing through her design business. In other words, she tried to grab the asset before I could, and in doing so, she exposed herself completely. Priya, when I told her, said simply, "Good. Now I need to tell you about the ownership papers." This is the part that requires some explanation, because I want you to understand that I did nothing illegal. What happened was not fraud. It was, as Priya later described it, the legal system working exactly as it is designed to work. When Priya filed the initial marital asset claim in early December, she included in the documentation a formal notice of disputed ownership regarding the property on the corner lot in the eastern suburb. Because the property had been purchased using funds traceable to marital income, as Kayla's financial analysis documented, and because Darian's holding company had not been properly disclosed as a marital asset, the purchase was flagged for review. What this meant, practically, was that the title, which had been processed hastily and with the intent of being finalized at what Darian and Alicia were calling their celebration dinner in the third week of December, was subject to a legal hold. The title, in its then current state, could not be cleanly transferred. Priya, working with a title attorney, ensured that any subsequent transfer would require additional documentation. Documentation that, if provided, would direct the property into a contested asset account, which, in the context of our divorce proceedings, was being managed with me as the primary claimant due to the nature of the concealment. I did not secretly change the ownership papers. What I did was ensure that the legal mechanism already in place, the contested asset claim, meant that any attempt to finalize the title would result in the property falling under my legal claim rather than theirs. It is a distinction that matters to me. I did not steal, I simply let the law arrive before they did. The celebration dinner was on the 21st of December. I know this because Darian told me he had a client event that evening and would be back late. I know the restaurant because Kayla, who has a gift for navigating social situations that I enormously admire, happened to have made a dinner reservation at the same establishment several weeks prior under her own name for that same evening. I was not hiding. I was sitting at a table in the main dining room with Kayla eating a very good sea bass and waiting. Darian and Alicia arrived at 7:40. They were shown to a table near the back. Lucian Farrell joined them at 8. They ordered wine. They looked pleased. I let them get through their appetizers. At approximately 8:30, I walked to their table. I want to be precise about the way I did this, because the way you approach a moment like that matters. I did not stride. I did not perform. I walked the way I always walk, calmly, with the particular posture my mother instilled in me from childhood. I was wearing a burgundy dress I had bought 2 weeks earlier specifically for the occasion. My hair was done. I was, by any honest accounting, composed. Darian looked up and went the color of chalk. Alicia looked up and looked between Darian and me with the rapid assessment of someone doing very fast calculations about what category of situation they were in. Lucian Farrell looked up and looked politely confused. I pulled out the empty chair across from Alicia. Lucian's chair he moved obligingly, already sensing something irreversible was happening, and I sat down. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, and I meant it, genuinely, in the way that you can mean something entirely while also doing it anyway. Darian said my name. Just my name, like it was a question. "I know what tonight is," I said. "I know what the dinner is for. I know about the house. I know about Alicia. I know about the holding company, the transferred funds, the consulting fees routed through her design accounts, and the secondary account you opened 18 months ago. Darian, I know the balance. I know the transaction history, and I know that the property title you're planning to finalize tonight is subject to a legal hold." The table was very quiet. "The title cannot be transferred tonight," I said, "or ever in the way you've planned, because those assets are now formally classified as contested marital property. My attorney filed the relevant documentation 3 weeks ago." "Lucian," I said, turning to him with what I hoped was a kind expression, because I had no quarrel with Lucian Farrell, "you may want to call your brokerage's legal department in the morning. Some of the funds transferred to your account in the past 3 weeks may be part of the review." Lucian Farrell put his fork down. Alicia looked at Darian. Darian looked at the table. He was still chalk white. Then something shifted in his expression, a hardening, a pivot, and he looked up at me. "You don't have anything," he said. "You can't prove any of this. You're bluffing." "I'm not," I said. "But I understand why you'd hope that." I set a small envelope on the table. Inside was a summary document, prepared by Priya, outlining the key elements of the asset claim and the financial evidence Kayla had compiled. It was not the full picture. The full picture was already with the relevant authorities, but it was enough to make the picture clear. Darian picked it up. He read it. His jaw tightened. "This is a threat," he said. "You realize that. If you follow through on this, You'll what?" I asked, and my voice was genuinely curious. He stopped. "Because I have 4 audio recordings of conversations in our kitchen," I said, "in which you make statements about financial moves made without my knowledge or consent. I have documentation of the holding company. I have the financial analysis. And I have, as of this week, confirmed reports from 2 separate financial compliance investigators who found the material I submitted to them sufficient to open inquiries." Alicia's face had changed entirely. She had gone from calculating to something that looked, for the first time, genuinely frightened. Alicia, I said, and I turned to her and tried to be direct without being cruel, because she was a person, and even people who make terrible choices are people. The financial activity routed through your design accounts over the past 14 months has been flagged. There is also the matter of a civil dispute from 4 years ago in your previous city, which establishes a pattern that investigators find relevant. I believe you may receive some correspondence in the near future. She said nothing. She looked at her wine glass. I'm going to go back to my table now, I said. Enjoy your dinner. I stood. I straightened my dress. I walked back to Kayla, who was watching with the expression of someone witnessing something they will describe for the rest of their life at dinner parties. I sat down. I finished my sea bass. It was very good. What happened afterward was not cinematic. Consequences rarely are. They unspool slowly through legal channels and administrative processes and the grinding bureaucratic machinery of institutions doing their jobs. But they happened. The divorce proceedings were contentious for approximately 6 weeks, and then Darian's attorney had a quiet conversation with Priya, and the contention mostly stopped. The financial evidence was what Priya had said it was, very difficult to contest. The contested asset account, once formalized, meant that the house on the corner lot was assessed as part of the marital estate and distributed accordingly. I did not want the house. I had never wanted the house, but I wanted its value, and I received it. Darian's professional standing suffered. The financial compliance inquiry found sufficient basis to refer certain elements of the holding company's activity to a more formal investigation. He was not criminally charged. The line between aggressive tax strategy and fraud is one that investigators and prosecutors draw carefully, but the professional review was damaging enough. 2 development partners quietly ended their involvement with his projects. A board position he had held for 3 years was discontinued. He had used our shared future as a funding mechanism for a different life. The consequences of that were proportional. Now for the part about Alicia. I told you that I had noted months earlier the pattern of financial activity that moved through her business accounts, the way funds appeared to pass through in a manner that created the impression of legitimate income while serving a different structural purpose. I told you that Kayla had flagged it, that Priya had noted it, and that it established what they called a pattern. What I did not tell you until now is that in October, 2 months before the dinner, 6 weeks before I planted the rumor about Amsterdam, I had submitted an anonymous report to the relevant financial regulatory body. The report was careful, documented, and included the supporting records I had compiled. I submitted it through Priya's office, under proper legal guidance, with nothing in it that was speculative or unprovable. And then I waited. Regulatory investigations take time. I knew that. I was patient. The inquiry contacted Alicia for the first time in January. I know this because Kayla heard, through a mutual professional connection, that Alicia had retained an attorney. The inquiry asked Alicia, among other things, about the source and nature of certain consulting income she had received and the transfers made through her accounts over the preceding 18 months. Alicia, attempting to demonstrate that the income was legitimate business revenue, provided documentation that, according to what filtered back to Priya through the legal network, actually confirmed the regulator's concerns rather than alleviating them. In attempting to prove one thing, she demonstrated another. She had not understood, when she walked into that situation, that the documentation she thought would protect her had already been seen, that the shape of what she had done had already been mapped, that the investigators already knew what they were looking for because someone had told them, months before, exactly where to look. She had walked into a room whose walls she could not see. I don't know exactly what her resolution will be. Legal proceedings at that level move slowly. What I know is that, as of the last information I received, the inquiry has found sufficient basis to continue, and Alicia Marin is no longer running her design business. She is, I believe, managing a very different kind of paperwork than she expected to be managing this year. People have asked me since. Friends, a few family members, my mother, who found out most of it eventually and responded with a long silence followed by a single nod. Whether I felt guilty, whether there were moments when I thought I had gone too far. I have thought about this carefully because I take that question seriously. I did not fabricate evidence. I did not make false reports. I did not manipulate anyone into doing something they would not otherwise have done. Alicia made her own choices. Darian made his own choices. Lucian Farrell, who cooperated fully with all relevant inquiries and was ultimately found to have been, himself, a victim of a misleading client relationship, made his own choices too. What I did was observe, document, wait, and ensure that the information I had was in the right hands at the right time. I let the systems that exist for exactly this purpose do what they were designed to do. My mother used to also say, there is a difference between revenge and accountability. Revenge is about making yourself feel better. Accountability is about making things right. I think what I did was accountability. I think it was the hardest kind, the kind that requires you to feel everything, to grieve the life you thought you had, and still to act with clarity rather than rage. I grieved. Quietly, privately, in the way of people who are not able to fall apart when the world needs them to hold shape. I grieved the 14 years. I grieved the version of Darian I had believed in for so long. I grieved the particular variety of future, the one you build with another person, the one that exists between you and nowhere else, that I had thought was mine. And then I picked up my phone and called Priya and went to work. It is spring now. I am living in an apartment I chose myself, in a neighborhood I love, with windows that face east and catch the morning light in a way that makes the whole place feel like it's breathing. Kayla has been here for dinner 4 times already. My mother flew in for a week in February, and we cooked together and talked more honestly than we have in years. My work is good. The nonprofit's new program initiative launches next quarter, and I am proud of it. I run, I sleep. I eat meals that are made for one person and feel no absence in that, only the particular cleanness of a life shaped to fit exactly me without compromise. I drive past the eastern suburbs sometimes. I don't go past the corner lot. I don't need to. I know what it was and what it cost, and that is enough. The morning I signed the final divorce documents, I sat in Priya's office and I thought about that Tuesday in October, the one where Darian called to say he'd be late, and I saved him a plate and said, of course. I thought about who I was then, how willing I had been to believe in the goodness of someone I loved, how much I had trusted the life we'd built together without needing to look at it too closely. I don't regret that trust. I think trusting people you love is the right thing to do, right up until the evidence tells you otherwise. But I am glad that when the evidence came, I didn't look away. I am glad I was steady. I am glad I was patient. I am glad I was careful. And I am glad, in the way that you are glad when something that should have broken you didn't, when you discover that the person you are is stronger than the thing that tried to undo you. I am glad for all of it. Even the roasted chicken. Even the receipt. Even the moment I stood at that restaurant table, composed in my burgundy dress, and watched 14 years of lies see the light. Especially that. Because the woman who sat back down at that table with Kyla and finished her sea bass without shaking, that woman is who I turned out to be. And she is, I think, exactly who I was all along. I just needed the darkness to show me where I shone. This has been a Mrs. Karma story. If justice found you in this telling, share it with someone who needs to believe that it still exists.